in this video, we're going to quickly go through what the excretory system is made up of, all of the different organs. We're also going to talk about why we need an excretory system. So all of that fun stuff. So first of all, just a couple of reminders of things that we're kind of talking about in chapter 6. And kind of relates to why we need an excretory system. So when we go through cellular processes, sometimes that creates waste products. So cellular processes could be like digestion or cellular respiration, things like that. So it could change the volume of water in our body and also could take away or add in dissolved substances into our body fluids. So our excretory system is going to kind of help maintain that water volume in our body by adding or taking away depending on the level of water. And also it's going to sometimes get rid of some of the dissolved substances, especially if they're a waste product that shouldn't be in our body. If it builds up, it sometimes is a bad thing. So our kidney's job is to do all of this stuff. So regulate the water volume and make sure that the volume of our fluids has the right amount of all the concentrated substances in it. And making sure that if we need it again, we can keep it. If we don't need it again, we just get rid of it in our urine. So some waste that we produce in our body from byproducts is like carbon dioxide or water. We can use water, but if we have excess water, we can get rid of it as wastes. We also make things like sodium and chloride and hydrogen ions and other things that are the result of breaking down proteins and nucleic acids, which is DNA, if you guys recall that, learning that from the big pink table. So if you remember both proteins and nucleic acids, you remember my kind of trick of this. So they have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and a little bit of sulfur. The issue with that is the nitrogen that's in nucleic acids and proteins, mainly proteins, the nitrogen can build up and form kind of toxic substances in our blood. We want to get rid of that nitrogen waste. It's called our nitrogenous waste. Remember that carbohydrates are just made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Same with lipids. So that is going to be helpful when we are doing digestion, and it's super easy to break down carbohydrates. We don't have to worry about any waste products that build up, like when we break down proteins or nucleic acids. So when glucose is metabolized, what waste products are produced? Well, when glucose is metabolized, that's cellular respiration. So the waste products that we do produce are things like carbon dioxide, which we eventually will breathe out. And we also make water, which we can use elsewhere or pee it out if we have too much of it. So glucose is not really our concern when we're making, when we're breaking it down. It's more other things like proteins and nucleic acids that we're concerned about. And that's why we need our excretory system. So like I mentioned on the last slide, the other thing that we don't have in carbohydrates, but we do have in protein, is nitrogen. So this is actually a picture of an amino acid. You can see that nitrogen is right here. Okay, that nitrogen is going to cause issues because if it forms other compounds, when it forms other things, it can be really, really, really scary and things like that. So when proteins are metabolized, the atom combines with hydrogen to produce things like this, which is ammonia. Okay, we don't want ammonia to build up in our blood because it can be super toxic. So if that nitrogen from an amino acid combines with hydrogens, it can produce ammonia, which is really bad for our body. So speaking of ammonia, we can only have about 0.05 milligrams of ammonia. Okay, that's super, super small amount. So when our body builds up this nitrogenous waste, to immediately deal with it, it goes to our liver, which is this organ right here. And our liver makes it into something called urea. And urea is a little bit safer to be in our body, but we want to make sure that we eventually get rid of the urea. And that is what mainly composes our urine, is urea. It's what gives the urine kind of that urine smell and also makes it a little bit yellow in color. So that is what is like the main component of our urine is. The rest of it is other wastes and water and other things that we're going to talk about later. So the main thing that our excretory system is in charge of, is getting rid of this urea, because originally it was ammonia, which is NH3, and it's super, super toxic in our body. So our liver kind of helps our excretory system by converting it into urea, but we still need to get rid of it because it's super unsafe. So that is why we need an excretory system. That's why it's so important in our body to have that. So our excretory system is made up of a bunch of different things. So I'm going to go ahead and label these things with you, and then on the next slide I'll go through the functions. So the first thing is the kidney. The kidney is an organ that's actually, if you guys feel between the bottom rib and the top of your pelvis, your kidney sits just kind of below the muscles of your back right there. So they say someone like punches you in the lower back, they'll call it like a kidney shot. It's because it's actually like your kidney. This tube that goes from the kidney all the way down into the bladder, this is the bladder, is called the ureter. So the tube that connects the kidney to the bladder, that is the ureter. This is the bladder. And then the urethra. The urethra is the tube that connects the bladder to the outside of the person, depending on if it's male or female. Females' urethras are a lot shorter than males. And then these two are blood vessels. So the red one is pointing to the renal artery. The renal artery would be bringing blood. Oh, that's not how you spell artery. The renal artery would be bringing blood to the kidneys that would be full of nitrogenous wastes, but would be oxygenated. And then the renal vein, which is the blue one, the renal vein would be taking blood back to the heart, but it would be clean blood. But now it's deoxygenated because the kidneys would use up the oxygen in the cells in order to do all these processes. So they're red and blue based on their oxygenation or deoxygenation, but it's actually like this is the dirty blood going down into the kidneys, and then the clean blood with no waste products would be going back up to the heart and to the rest of our body eventually. So kind of opposite as what we would think, because we're normally like thinking about carbon dioxide and oxygen. This time we're focusing more on the actual waste products in the blood. So with that being said, going back to these things, now that we've labeled them, the kidney is there to filter blood. It has all of these little tiny tubules that fill up the structure of the kidney that are used to filter and eventually create something called urine, which is the substance that will go down these tubes, fill the bladder, and you'll eventually excrete it. The ureter is the tube. It's about 28 centimeters long, and it uses the process of peristalsis, which is like muscle-like contractions to push the urine down into the bladder. Urethra is about 20 centimeters in males and about 4 centimeters in females. Females are more prone to urinary tract infections because their urethra is a lot smaller, so it's easier for bacteria to get into it and then into the bladder, so more common bladder infections as well. Urinary bladder is just there for storage. It's controlled by sphincters, so there's a sphincter on the bottom to allow the urine to not leak out. And then when you are having a full bladder, then you can allow your urinary bladder to basically empty. And the renal artery and vein are just there to supply blood to and from the kidneys. So we're going to talk a little bit about the actual composition of urine. So the process of excretion, which is the excretory system, is basically taking waste and separating it from the fluids that we have in our body and then eventually eliminating them. So we think a lot about eliminating as the process of excretion, but remember it's also the separating process as well. So in our respiratory, for example, we excrete carbon dioxide because we get rid of it. We eliminate it. It also takes the carbon dioxide away from the blood. In the skin, we excrete water and salt. In our perspiration, we also have urea in our perspiration. So that's one of the reasons why you get a body odor from sweat, because the urea is there to make it kind of smell a little bit off, just like it is in our urine. And then the digestive system excretes water, salts, and lipids. So we don't actually consider feces as an excretory product. It's actually excreting water, salts, and lipids like back from our colon into our blood, which is like the opposite of what you would think. But basically all the other waste products, other than the ones listed above, are excreted in our urinary system or our excretory system. So like nitrogenous waste that we mentioned before. So now we're going to go through and actually look at what a picture of a kidney looks like. So this is an actual cartoon picture I wanted to then draw a picture over here of what it looks like. So I drew it beforehand so you didn't have to watch me draw for like 20 minutes. So just to make sure we understand where these names are coming from. So this is the tube that like leads from the kidney called the ureter. This is the renal pelvis, which basically all of the little sections of the kidney lead into it, and it collects all of the urine and then eventually sends it down the ureter. So the renal pelvis. This thing in the green color is actually what you would see in all of these little circle-like mushroom capsules, and it's called the nephron. The nephron is the structure that we're going to be zooming in on in a couple of days. And really focusing on what it does. So the nephron is like what we talk about in the kidney. It's like the little tubule thing that actually filters the blood. And then we have two different parts. We have the renal pelvis, which is the outside portion of the actual kidney, and the renal medulla is the inside portion. So these are the parts of the kidney that we're going to have to remember. And again, later we're going to talk more about the nephron and its function. We're going to zoom in on it and talk about all of its parts. We're going to talk about what each part does. So that's going to be kind of the main focus for this chapter. The rest of it is going to be talking like really, really specifically about the nephron. So I think that's all we have to talk about today. So hopefully you guys have a good one. Hopefully this makes sense, and I'll talk to you guys later.